Also, too, I mean, when we talk about the moves that Biden might have planned here, perhaps reversing the stance on the Keystone Pipeline, also worth following as we check in on the price of crude, but appreciate that. As far as other things on the Biden administration front here, Akiko, I know you've been looking at a few things, including the CFPB and the appointment there. That might be one that might have gotten lost in all the shuffle, too, here, especially when we focus in on what Janet Yellen is saying in her Senate testimony. But the CFPB, important to watch, considering how large of a role they might play here in this recovery in 2021.
Yeah, certainly the cabinet appointments and the confirmation hearings really taking the headlines in the initial days here. But we are getting a better sense of how the Biden administration is going to be looking at the issue of regulation. We got, of course, Gary Gensler being named as the incoming SEC chair, but also Rohit Chopra. This is a name that a lot of people who've been following the tech space and particularly the conversation about regulation, that's a name that's very familiar to those because of what he has been doing at the FTC. He's certainly been one of the more aggressive ones going after tech. Back in 2019, he, of course, was one of those that disagreed with that $5 billion settlement on the privacy issue with Facebook, saying that just wasn't tough enough. So those who have been pushing for the tech regulation, certainly saying this is going to be a loss at the FTC. And there's concern that Democrats could be in the minority there now with Rohit Chopra's absence. Now, that loss over at the FTC being seen as a gain over at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, at least those who were very on board with the initial establishment of that bureau that came out of Dodd-Frank, largely because Senator Elizabeth Warren pushed for that. Rohit Chopra, very instrumental on that front. And it's going to be interesting to see how his policies pan out. But the message here appears to be sort of regulation is back, and that he will be very tough on businesses as well as these large tech companies moving forward, just keeping a check on these names.
About Gary Gensler, who's set to head the SEC. He formerly headed the CFTC, that's the Commodities Watchdog. So this has happened before. We saw in the 90s, we saw a couple of people share this role, but he's gotten a lot of flack over the years because of his handling of the MF Global bankruptcy, and that really was a disaster for the futures industry. I will say the guy is really bright. I was just reading a paper that he co-authored in November of last year for MIT. It's called Deep Learning and Financial Stability, and it talks about artificial intelligence, deep learning processes, and how that can affect financial markets. That's the thinking that we need right now, because we just had the fastest bear market in history last year. And liquidity has just been evaporating over the last 2 decades, and it's probably going to get worse. So at least somebody at the helm is thinking about this. Now, are we going to get the correct policy prescriptions? Are we going to get it to the exchange level? That's going to take a while. But I think it's always interesting when you come into a new administration, you have these ideas, you just kind of watch them get played out, because this really is a decade that's going to be about the disruption, not only of just about everything we do, but also the financial markets themselves.
Yeah, and Jared, a lot of crypto enthusiasts also watching that very closely. As Zach noting, of course, that Gary Gensler was a blockchain professor at MIT. So we'll see how that regulation shapes up.